You're listening to The Hypnotic Empath, and I'm your host, Robyn Holm. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, a body talk practitioner, and an empowered empath with over 2 decades of experience helping sensitive souls like you reconnect with your power. This podcast is a space for deep healing, subconscious transformation, and real-world support. We'll do some guided hypnotherapy sessions, we'll talk to some incredible guests, and we'll help you learn to release what isn't yours, to protect your energy, and to finally feel safe being you. It's time to move from surviving to thriving. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Hypnotic Empath. I am your host, Robyn Holm, and I'm so excited to introduce somebody to you that I discovered on TikTok. So I only got on TikTok a few months ago. It was not really even on my radar. Every time I'd open the app, I'd feel like it was yelling at me, and I just really was not very drawn to it. But my website person said, Robyn, you're a hypnotherapist. You need to be on TikTok. So I started researching other hypnotherapists on TikTok and I found Andy Robson. His videos are fantastic. I felt an immediate connection with him as soon as I started watching his stuff. I have learned a ton from him. He has been so generous with his time and with, just collaborating back and forth. And I was so pleased when he agreed to be on the podcast today. So, Andy, welcome here.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could just tell us all a little bit about yourself, how you got into hypnosis, where you live, what you do, whatever you'd like to share.
Okay, so I live in Glasgow, which is in Scotland. I'm actually from the northeast of England. Hypnosis has been something that I've always had a bit of an obsession with. I could hypnotize people when I was younger, and I've always been interested in it. And I then went to uni to study music. So I have a degree in classical performance. You'll see all of these musical instruments around me. I'm actually a brass player. So I studied that at university. And when I finished, I didn't really know what to do. So I became a primary school teacher, as you do. So I worked with children between the ages of 4 and 12. I did that in Manchester for 2 years. Then I moved to Glasgow. And all in all, I did that for around about 20 years. Along with that, I also performed as a musician. I've been a Scottish champion a number of times. I've represented Scotland at the European Championships a number of times. Played in all of these huge, big concert halls. And alongside all of that, really, I suppose for between 10 to 12 years, I developed quite extreme anxiety in life. And alongside that, performance anxiety as a musician, and it left me really unable to play. So I stopped playing and performing for around about 5 years. I suppose I did the classic thing, maybe specifically classic guy thing, that I didn't tell anybody how I was feeling for a long time until I reached where many of my clients reach, which was sort of like a crisis point, and I needed to do something about it. I had a friend on Facebook who is a hypnotherapist. She had been a teacher and retrained. I studied music with her a long time ago. So I booked some sessions with her. It completely changed my life. And as soon as I finished working with her, I went to train with the people who trained her and I started this business. So I have been a hypnotherapist for just over 2 years. I qualified at the end of January 2 years ago. And since I had those hypnotherapy sessions, it's, I suppose, changed my outlook on what anxiety is for a person who's dealing with that. And it's just enabled me to go from always wanting to be a hypnotherapist to building this business very quickly in the space of not that much time. I've built quite a big social media following. I've been working with clients literally all over the world, all over the States, Canada, Australia, Tunisia, Greece, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. That's just like the last month or so. So hypnosis really not only helped me to deal with anxious thoughts and feelings, but self-confidence, self-belief, everything that really is all wrapped into one, I suppose. So fast forward a couple of years from where I was, which was my darkest time, to now, I don't really say, I wouldn't say that I deal with anxiety at all. Of course, I have the general worries of life, but I am much better equipped to deal with them now than I was before I worked with a hypnotherapist. And now part of my daily routine is to do self-hypnosis so that I'm constantly working with my nervous system to keep it calm and grounded.
What does self-hypnosis look like for you?
So I have quite a set routine in terms of self-hypnosis. I teach it to all of my clients, generally in the fourth session, so that they can then go and use the skills I've taught. So I'm not sure where I learned these rules from. If it was from, so I was trained by Anthony and Freddie Jacquin, if you know who they are. And then I've also done some online training with Mike Mandel. I think we spoke about Mike before. He's definitely somebody that you should do some work with. So before I do self hypnosis, I give myself instructions. The first one is how long I'll go into hypnosis for. I generally do about 20 minutes. That seems to be the optimum time for me. I set a timer on my phone for 21 minutes, just in case I don't come out of trance. But I always wake up on 20 minutes because my unconscious mind seems to understand time. So that's the first instruction. The second one is I give myself a purpose framed in the positive. So it wouldn't be to get rid of anxious thoughts and feelings, but to come out of hypnosis, with a sense of positivity, or for increased levels of self-confidence. And then the third instruction, if I'm doing this before I go to sleep, I'll say, I will drift off into a deep sleep after this. If I'm coming back to wakeful awareness, I'll say, I'll return feeling confident and calm. Then I close my eyes and I literally talk to myself in my head in the same way that I would talk to a client, until I just drift away and lose focus. And then I'll just drift off and I'll stay in that place somewhere, I suppose, being awake and being asleep. I think people talk about it being a hypnagogic state when you're falling asleep. I'll go somewhere there, and it's the best part of my day. And I'll do that for about 20 minutes every day. Yeah. And I teach all my clients to do that in the last session. I'll take them through that. I'll provide them the recording of me doing that with them until they can just do that themselves with their eyes closed.
What an amazing tool. Do you use an anchor at all with that state?
Not with self hypnosis, but I will use an anchor. Um, Often when I'm working with people who are struggling with anxious thoughts and feelings, they're also struggling with self confidence. So one of the sessions is normally a confidence session, and I'll use like an NLP style anchor. I've seen you do it with your first finger and thumb. I'll do it with fourth finger and thumb, and I'll get them to repeat a phrase or a word inside the head. Mine, I don't mind telling clients this. Mine is really cringy. Mine is said with like an American or Canadian accent. I'll say awesome because I saw Mike Mandel do this, and that's how he speaks. Um, I, I was working with a lady who she asked herself this question every morning: how bad can today be? That's how she started her day. And when she was in trance, I flippantly said, and tomorrow when you wake up, you will ask yourself, how much fun can I have today? And she burst out laughing in trance. So the next session, when we did some anchoring, that's the phrase that she used. And every time I sort of emailed her, I would start with that sentence and it would bring back those good feelings. So I use anchoring more for self-confidence. I've used it as a musician before I go on stage. I'll fire the anchor off, and I'll teach people to stack. So if they're going through the day and they just have a wonderful experience, or somebody says something nice to them and it makes them feel good, they'll squeeze their finger and thumb together just to stack it in.
I've been really focusing on that here just lately when I was just in Maui and I would be walking on the beach, which is my favorite thing to do. But I'd be walking on the beach alone, calm, peaceful, and I would feel this blooming in the center of my chest, this blooming feeling of just contentment of whatever it was. I was like, oh, I'm going to anchor this in right now and save it for later. So then I would do my thumb and finger together. And I always say to my clients, you can choose whatever thumb and finger feels good to you. I even had a client one time who did her thumb and opposite finger on her opposite hand, and that was her anchor. Or I've had people do it like, like a diamond, thumb and finger together. Whatever feels good to you. It's just easy to surreptitiously do an anchor like thumb and finger together.
Yeah.
So I would anchor that in and save it for later because I knew that I was going to be flying home on the red eye with my two little kids. And I was like, I'm going to save this good feeling. And I used it a lot during my flight and during that 24-hour time period. But I love that idea of, you called it stacking. I call it like
Yeah.
banking up the good feelings that you can withdraw.
Yeah, I think it's like, if you think of it like, I suppose as hypnotherapists, we always talk in metaphors, don't we? If you
Yeah.
think about it like the bank, if you constantly withdraw money from the bank without putting any back in, you'll have no money left. So it's just sort of filling it back up. The only time I've used a slight variance, I worked with a lady who had chronic pain issues. and a few other things that she was dealing with. So we did more like a safety anchor with her. And in that moment, I got her to put a hand over her heart. You will know this free well, that when you hug somebody, it releases, all those good chemicals, endorphins, serotonin into the body. And if you put your hand over your heart, it replicates that. So for her, that's the only time I've strayed away from that anchor to do that. And I think the only reason it's suggested to do that is because it's a much more unusual thing to do than that. You might do that more often in life than that.
Yeah, I agree. And you can also, because thumb and first finger together, because we do it so often,
Mm.
sometimes we can accidentally do that, and that's a good
Yeah.
thing too.
Yeah. I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, either way you look at it, it's whatever you're gonna remember to do is what I say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Andy, could you explain to those listening why, as hypnotherapists, we rely on metaphor so much?
Uh, I have a great metaphorical story that I tell people. And when I tell people this story, it generally makes them cry, actually. But we tell metaphors because metaphors get past, I suppose, the conscious mind and sink into the unconscious mind. Often people will go away from a session with me without me telling them the reason I've told them a particular story. And then all of a sudden they'll be like, oh, or it will just become apparent. So it's a way of helping people to change without telling them exactly what the change is. It's much more effective when it sort of bypasses the conscious mind and goes straight into the unconscious mind, I suppose, because the unconscious recognizes metaphors on a different level than the conscious mind does. So it's just that I suppose you can bypass any kind of pushback from a person's critical faculty. So metaphors are great for that, and also storytelling. When somebody tells a great story and you're on the edge of your seat and listening, film producers do this all the time. It's a way of keeping people occupied and captivated, and it's way better than just saying, well, if you do this, this is what will happen. So I suppose it goes back to Erickson. You'll know Milton Erickson. He was the greatest storyteller of all time in terms of, I suppose, therapy. So a lot of the stories that we draw on will go back to some of the stuff that he did.
Would you share that story with us? The metaphor that you tell that makes people cry? Do you have time? Is
I
it the
can, but it's quite a long story. But I can
Oh.
tell you the story if you want. It might take about 5 minutes or so.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, so I've not told this story for a little while, so I'll need to see if I can remember it all. It's also like in hypnotherapy speak, it's got nested loops. It's not just one story, it's several stories rolled into one. So I was a teacher for many years, for 20 years. And so many of the children that I taught are now in the mid-20s, sad to say. And so from time to time, I'll bump into these people. So some of this, the stories that I tell are true, but names and certain aspects of them will be changed. But I spent some time teaching in Manchester, and Manchester's got quite a big music scene there. And so I was in Manchester a little while ago. It's a long time since I taught in Manchester, but I was in a bar in Manchester. It was like an open mic night. I love music. I'm a musician. So I was at the bar and this band started to play and this girl started to sing and she was unbelievable, like incredible. And I turned around and looked and this girl smiled and waved at me and I was quite taken aback. And so just sort of after this had happened, just before this had happened, I was at a music concert. So Oasis is my favorite band. If you know the band Oasis, I have a 15-year-old son. He plays guitar. He loves music. So Joe and I went to see Oasis. Oasis was my first gig in Manchester 20 years ago. Oasis was Joe's first gig last summer. And so we went to see Oasis. And while we were in the midst of singing with our arms around each other, and Joe's a real introvert. He's very empathetic and very introverted. And it's the first time I've really seen him let himself go. It was great. And then while we were singing, I turned and looked at this lady next to me. And I'd worked with this lady like 20 years ago. And we'd had a chat. And so this lady used to run the breakfast club in a school I worked in a long time ago. Now, if you don't know what a breakfast club is, I'm sure you do, but breakfast club in a school in the UK is where parents can bring the children in before school starts if they need to rush to work. And so this lady worked in the breakfast club with me. And so the Breakfast Club was situated right near where my classroom was in this school, sort of a long, long time ago. And even at the start of my career, people would bring their children to me if there was anything wrong, because I don't know. It turned out that I'm quite empathetic. I didn't realize that at the time. And so I could sense what was going on with the child and I could help them. So there was a young girl in my school. We'll call her Lisa. That's obviously not her name, but there was a young girl in my school. Again, this is many years ago. And she'd been adopted from a very difficult situation. And her mum brought her in for the first day at Breakfast Club, and she cried and cried and cried. And so the mum thought, what shall I do? And she thought, I'll go and see Mr. Robson. That was my teacher name. So she brought this little girl to me, and she came into my room, and the mum said, what shall I do? And I said, just go to work. She'll be fine with me. So Lisa came in and she sat down and she looked above me and she stopped crying for just a second. She'd been really, really sobbing. And I looked up and there was a teddy bear on the shelf above me. And I said, would you like this teddy bear? And she stopped crying enough to say yes. And I said, well, you can only have this teddy bear if you're prepared to be brave, because whoever holds this teddy bear becomes brave. And she said, I am. So I gave her this teddy bear and she stopped crying. And I said, would you like to take the teddy bear into Breakfast Club? And she said, I would. And I said, well, you can only take this teddy bear into Breakfast Club if you're prepared to be brave, because this teddy bear makes everyone brave. And she said, I am. So she went out into Breakfast Club and I sort of watched through the gap in the door and she was smiling, she was laughing. This girl was a really shy, introverted girl. She didn't really have any friends. And so I thought, great, I wonder if she'll bring the bear, back to me after Breakfast Club. She didn't. And she kept this bear. So I went outside at break time, at playtime, and there she was outside with the bear under her arm. I'd asked her if she'd like to give the bear a name. She said, I'll call him Mr. Robson. So she's outside with Mr. Robson under her arm, smiling and laughing with the other kids. So I asked the teacher after a few days, how have things been for her? And the teacher said, it's a funny thing, but she started to come out of a shell. She's answering questions in class. She was only 5 years old. She started to talk to the other kids. I checked in with her mum, same thing. So things had really changed. This went on for years. She had the teddy bear with her all the time. Then one day I was late for school because I'd had a flat tire. And when I got into school, the bear was on my desk. And I thought, oh, this can't be good. So I looked out into Breakfast Club. There she was, totally fine, totally happy, laughing, And so I never asked her why she brought the teddy bear back to my room. I just left it with her. And the years went by and she left school and I never really saw her again after that. And then I was in the stadium with Joe, and Oasis was, and this lady said, have you ever heard anything from Lisa? Because when she left school, I lost touch with her. And then fast forward to a few weeks later, I was in a bar in Manchester, and this band was singing, and I looked at this girl and she was singing and she was unbelievable. And it was Lisa. And so she came to see me at the bar and she said, do you mind if I have a drink with you, Mr. Robson? I said, well, you can, but don't call me that because it looks weird in a bar if you call me that. So we had a drink and, we laughed about old times. We cried about old times because we'd both been through a lot together. And I said, can I ask you one question? And she said, yeah, of course. I said, I always wanted to ask you this question, but I was always too scared. She said, you can ask me anything you want and I'll answer it. And I said, what happened with the bear? Why did he come back to me? And she just looked at me dead in the eye and said, because I realized it was never about the bear. And that's the end of the story. And I suppose there's lots in that to unpick. And that's why metaphors are great, because it keeps people captivated. You're nearly crying with that story. Everybody I tell that story to nearly cries. And it's also teaching you loads of things that you don't realize it's teaching you.
Yeah. You can really feel that, the emotion, right? Yeah, when you have a story. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. That was really, really powerful.
So when you study the Mike Mindell course, he talks about metaphors and he talks about loops and nested loops and so there are 3 different stories in there which I've laid together for a particular reason. And it's actually just a great story,
It is a great story. And then you closed
Yeah.
all the loops at the end so that we have that
Yeah.
that finality, which feels really good. It's inspiring. It's a really inspiring thing. Yeah, that is really cool. When did you first discover that you are an empath?
Um, I suppose part of the way through my teaching career. So the first school I worked in Manchester in England was, we would call it a rough area. It was inner city Manchester. It was very poverty stricken, that area. really. And I had children, like I had kids in my first class who were born drug addicts, or they'd lost parents to gun violence and things like that. So very quickly, I became aware of the fact that I was the one person that these children looked to for stability, for emotional stability. And when I started teaching when I was like 23. I was ill equipped to do that. I had no idea what I was doing. The door closed on my first class of 5-year-old kids. And I thought, like, what do I do here? And then I had all of these children who were coming to me for emotional support. And then I actually realized that I was good at that. It wasn't something that I ever thought I was good at. I knew I was naturally good with children, but I guess over the years, I became the person that people just went to for emotional support. And I guess I realized then that I would then take a lot of that stuff home with me mentally. So if I had a child who was going through something particularly difficult, I wouldn't just leave it at the school gates. I would take it home and it would sort of play on my mind. And then I guess I realized that I gave lots of me to other people without protecting myself as well. And so over the course of time, I guess I just became more aware of the fact that I was very emotionally in tune with other people, but could take on other people's emotions, sometimes not in a good way,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Oh, very much so. And how did anxiety, quote unquote, anxiety manifest for you?
Um, I guess a lot of the classic ways that it manifests for other people, and it's why I have been able to book so many clients who've come to work with me for anxiety, because I think when you struggled with something like anxiety, you speak a particular language, you speak the same language as other people. And it's not like I've tried to market myself that way, but when I've spoken about my experience, it's really resonated with other people, and people have booked with me because it sounded like I was talking about them. So for me, I would wake up on a morning and I would have about 6 seconds where I felt okay, and then it would all come back. What I now know as the cortisol dump, it would come back for me, and I would have that horrible feeling in my stomach, you know, like butterflies or knots in the stomach, um, sort of shallow breathing, what I would call at best brain fog and inability to think clearly. All things that I know now are because I had increased levels of adrenaline in my system. It's all sort of fight or flight related. And so then I would go through the day and I would be worrying about stuff, mostly worrying about the future. And what I know now is that psychologists say that 80% of the things that we worry about happening in the future never happens. So I wasted 80% of my time for 10 years, but that's okay. So I would spend the day largely pretending to be somebody I wasn't, pretending to be confident, pretending to be outgoing, pretending to be everything that I wanted everybody to think I was. Then I would go home and I would be exhausted because I'd been pretending all day. Then I'd go to bed really tired. I'd lie down and then my mind would switch on. I would worry about all the things from the day. I would sleep really poorly. I would wake up the next day and the cycle would start again. It got to the point where it was so bad for me that I had a spell where I didn't really eat for several weeks. I didn't sleep. I dropped a lot of weight. And that was the point where I thought I need to do something about this because it was becoming extremely unhealthy.
Were you still a teacher at this point or a vice principal?
Yes.
You were. Yeah. So I had the way that I got into this field was also through anxiety. I don't know if we had talked about that before, but I started with body talk and then trained as a
Yeah.
hypnotherapist more recently. But when I was in the fitness industry, I trained instructors to teach a group fitness program called Zumba. I don't know if it is in the
I
UK
know
too.
what it is. Yeah.
Okay, so I was part of the original team that brought Zumba to Canada. So I
Oh,
trained
wow.
instructors in Canada. Yeah. Loved it. Dream job. Always wanted to do it. I always wanted to teach on those massive stages internationally. I got to do all of that and I loved being a Zumba trainer. I loved it more. I wanted to do it till I was 85 years old. And I was so incredibly anxious. I would teach these trainings all day long, and then I would worry all night long about everything that I said and the people that I was talking to. And what if I said this wrong and maybe this was interpreted incorrectly? I didn't know I was an empath at the time because I am extremely outgoing. I'm not
Yeah.
introverted at all. So I had no idea that I am a quintessential empath too. So at the time, I always thought that empaths had to be introverted, right? Not the case. An empath means that you really take on other people's emotions, and depending on your background, you can even take it on as responsibility. So I felt
Yeah.
responsible for everyone's emotions. So I would train 58 instructors a day, and I felt responsible for every one of those people. And I did 2 trainings a weekend, and I did a master class on the Friday night, and I trained every single weekend for years. And all of these people, I felt responsible for every one of them, and I couldn't drop it. So I would fall asleep really easily, but then I would wake up between 1 and 3 in the morning, bolt awake, and not be able to go back to sleep. And I would replay stuff from high school. I would replay stuff from when I was in Australia. I would replay stuff from the training. I would replay this and that. And I could not get out of the trap in my brain. I couldn't
Yeah.
drain it. I was in that fight or flight all the time. And in the last year of my training career, I stopped sleeping. Just like you said, I literally just could not sleep in a hotel anymore. So I'd get to the hotel and I would hear every sound in every room. I'd hear the people about, and I realized now I was feeling all of them as well. I was feeling all the people in the hotel. So for that whole last year, I wouldn't sleep for 3 days a week. And then I would try to sleep for the rest of the time. It was brutal. And I mean, highly physical, highly physical, like basically a competitive athlete level fitness involved. But I think the fitness part was actually what saved me, because when I was teaching a class, I wasn't thinking about anything else, anything else. I was just completely present. And the
Yeah.
other thing that I discovered was, in retrospect, that because with group fitness, you're not actually touching anybody. You have usually a space between you on the stage and them in the classroom. And that was also what allowed me to do it for as long as I did, because I had a geographical boundary between their energy and mine. But I was faced them, so I was still able to connect with them, which was hugely important to me. And I got to the point where I just kept going even though I wasn't sleeping, and then my body started getting injured. And then I had injuries that were not healing, no matter how perfect I was, no matter how right I did everything, the best physiotherapists and nutrition, everything. But my body was like, I cannot carry this anymore. And I now realize in retrospect that I was locked in fight or flight. I was just lived there. And I remember on my dad's birthday, I was preparing for this training, that I was going to be teaching my dream 550 people at the Zumba convention down in Florida. I felt like they had chosen me. There was only 3 of us doing that training. They had chosen me to do it, and I wanted to do such a good job, and I prepared for it for months. And it was my dad's birthday. My dad loves a chat. And I couldn't even, like, I was at a training. I had flights and things to do, and I had all of this worry and anxiety. And I was like, if I can't even spend 30 minutes talking to my father on his birthday, my beloved father, something is very wrong. And so that was probably in like April. And by September, I took a sabbatical because my body just was not cooperating anymore. And that's when I found mind body work and the stress that we store in our body. And through that work, it was about 5 years of doing body talk. Then I started working with a hypnotherapist because I was also trying to get pregnant at the same time, and I couldn't get pregnant.
Yeah.
And my nervous system was locked in fight or flight, and it was activating my immune system, and my immune system was attacking the embryos. So I couldn't get
Yeah.
pregnant, even though my cycle was perfect and I was 27. So then I started working with a hypnotherapist. And basically, what she did was bring my nervous system down into rest and digest, right?
Yep.
And then future pace me to be able to even receive the embryo. So that's how I got into hypnosis. But it started with body talk. And it was when I started working with my hypnotherapist, she put in the bubble of protection for me, which is a metaphor. And the subconscious loves metaphors, because at that point, I was working one on one with people, touching, and I was like, Andy, I took everything. After the session, I'd replay the session in my mind, and I'd be like, what if they think this, or what if they did that? I was carrying it all. I would try like shaking the blankets and doing sage and having all the rocks, and it did not matter what I did. It was in my body. And then I worked with this hypnotherapist, and she put in the bubble of protection for me. And she suggested that other people's stuff would bounce off the bubble out into the universe, never to return. And that changed my life. That changed my life. And then I was able to work one on one with people without being exhausted. And now I
Yeah.
can do hypnosis, and I feel great after working with people one on one. And I do the bubble of protection now with every single client that I have, because as it turns out, it's 99.9% empaths that end up finding me and wanting to work with me. which was the strangest specialty. I could have never imagined it, but here I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have a few hypnotherapy friends. Like, so my hypnotherapist who I went to work with, she became a hypnotherapist after having hypnotherapy. And anybody else who I'm friends with that work in this field, they got into this field because they had hypnotherapy for something, and you will attract your audience based on the energy that you give out and the way that you speak and what you speak about, because people will look at you and go, yeah, I identify with you, in the same way that, probably 95% of the client work I do is anxiety based, because I talk about that. I think we're still, unfortunately, we still live in a world where talking about things like anxiety for many people is still taboo. If you had a bad leg, you would just go to the doctor. You wouldn't think about it. But if you're struggling with something else, you maybe wouldn't reach out. And that's what I did for a long time. So I'm quite open about the struggles that I had with anxiety, and I talk about it and I share my story because we should be able to. And then what happens then is people come and work with me because they think, he gets it. And that's what will be happening for you, that they will look at you and think, she understands. It's like, they're talking NLP about people's maps of the world. You sort of understand people's maps of the world who are dealing with that because you've been there yourself. And so you are best equipped to help those people. I think that I am maybe better equipped to help people struggling with anxiety than somebody else who hasn't been through that journey, because I understand it. I get what it feels like. I get the voices that you have inside of your head, the way you talk to yourself. I now I would have said I have anxiety, but now, many people will contact me and say my anxiety won't let me do this. And this is, we were talking off camera before about making enemies with people. You know, maybe some people won't like the way I talk about anxiety, but people talk about my anxiety as if it's like somebody who lives in the same house as you. I just had a set of really unhelpful thoughts, and those thoughts created my emotions. I used to think that emotions created thoughts, but every time we have a thought, we release a chemical into the bloodstream. If it's a negative thought, release adrenaline and cortisol. If it's a good thought, we release the good chemicals. I spent 99.9% of my time thinking badly. The way I spoke to myself was appalling. And eventually I had to think, so I have a son, he's 15, he's very empathetic, he's very gentle, and I'm always very careful with how I speak to him. And I had to start to ask myself, is that how I would speak to Joe? If the answer is no, then it's not how I should speak to myself, because we should speak to ourselves at least as nicely as we speak to the people we care about most, especially if you're an empath. And this is another really great metaphor that suddenly came to me one day. When you're on an airplane and they give you the safety instructions, who do they tell you to put the life jacket on first, you or your children? You, right? Because you are no good to them if you aren't okay yourself. And so it's even more important for an empath to make sure that you're okay before you start looking after the people, because what you do sort of just instinctively is you make sure everybody else is okay before you make sure you're okay. That's why you ended up with all of that stress in your body, and that's why I ended up with it in my body too. So I don't describe it now as I had anxiety. I just had a whole load of really unhelpful, unhealthy thoughts. And when I changed the way that I think, I changed the way that I feel. And it changed my life completely. So when I work with people for anxiety, the first place I start is self-talk. It's it's dealing with people's, self-deprecation, because the unconscious mind is listening to everything we say, right? And because the confirmation bias, if I say I'm stupid, my unconscious mind is going to look for all the evidence to prove that I am stupid. But if I tell myself I'm smart or I'm hardworking or whatever, the same thing is going to happen. That's where I start with everybody. And now, did I have anxiety? I just had some really terrible thoughts that just made me feel really bad. When I addressed that, everything changed for me.
And I think that using the word anxiety, though, is helpful for other people to recognize that you get it. And that's the thing, is that I often will say too, like, don't claim the diagnosis. So when you say my anxiety,
Mm.
then the subconscious is like, oh, this belongs to me. Perfect. I'll implement it deeper.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
with my son, it really struggles with anxious thoughts. It's not like you said, though, it's the chemicals that we release. Because what I
Absolutely.
actually realized too in retrospect is that I have histamine intolerance. And when
Mm.
histamine is in the nervous system, you present as anxious. I get the racing heart. I was
Yes.
in the hospital with like the heart. Did you get that? The heart pains and things like that?
No, but I get like the chest beating faster, especially when you go on stage as a musician to perform as well. I do get that.
Hmm.
I didn't have like chest pains, but a shift in breathing for sure.
Yes. So what I also reverse engineered that. So first I started with the mental talk and the
Mm,
hypnosis and all that. It wasn't until I figured out the histamine piece though
mm,
that I actually now say I do not have anxiety at all. I can be reasonable with myself because you know how it feels when you have anxious thoughts. It's hard to
yeah,
be reasonable. You'll get a thought and you're like, "Oh my God, is that true?" And then you start to self-perpetuate, right? Now I
yeah,
can be reasonable and I can say, I don't need to solve 70 ways till Sunday because that's really when somebody says like they like to be prepared and they're going to think of all the things that could go wrong and then they're going to think of seven solutions for each of those things and they're going to follow that
yeah,
along. That's anxiety, right? That's anxious thinking.
yeah. I mean, what you're talking about there is really useful in that a simple recognition. So every single human being gets a cortisol dump first thing on a morning because cortisol is dormant in the system when you're asleep and it's awake when you wake up. And so now if I get that on a morning, I can simply say, it's cortisol returning to my system rather than, oh shit, oh, sorry, I'm not sure if you can swear on this podcast,
Yeah.
or you can edit that out, or here we go again, anxiety is back. It's actually just a recognition that it's just something chemical that's going on in my body rather than it being anxiety. And so you can't you can't logic your way out of anxiety, but what you can do is you can look for evidence to suggest the contrary. And this is a great story from my life that's true. So when Oasis, I'm going to go back to Oasis. I'm obsessed with Oasis and taking Joe to see Oasis. But when Oasis released the tickets, the morning they went on sale at 9 o'clock, I was due on stage in a competition at 9 o'clock, so I couldn't buy the tickets. So I had several people trying to buy tickets for me, and I didn't get tickets and I was devastated. Then I went home at Christmas time, and there's a girl who lives in the next street to me. She lived in the next street to me, or next street to my parents when we were children, and she still lives in that family home because it was left to her when her parents passed away. And so I went to see her at Christmas, and she said, "You don't want to go and see Oasis, do you?" And I said, "Yes, why?" And she said, "I've got a spare ticket." So I got one spare ticket, but not one for Joe. And then I went back home a couple of weeks before the concert, and I was out for dinner with Joe and with my mum and dad. My mum and dad can be on the negative side of thinking. That's a nice way of saying it, I suppose. And so my friend Lisa called, same girl. And so I went outside to take the call and just said, "You're not going to believe this, but I've got another ticket for Oasis if you want it." And I was like, "Yes, I can take Joe." And so I went back inside. So Joe's mum and I aren't together. So I said, "Joe, you need to go and call your mum." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "You need to ask her if we can go to this place next week." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because we're going to see Oasis." So he went outside to call his mum. And this was going to be in a big stadium with like 85,000 people. And I was really excited. Joe's really excited. And my mum simply said, "Be careful you don't lose him." And the old version of me would have gone, oh no, what if I do? But I stopped and asked myself some questions. So when I worked in school, I used to take my children abroad to another country, and I did that for 7 or 8 years. So over the course of that time, I probably took about 300 children to another country on an airplane, on trains, on boats, on buses. So I asked myself the first question: of those 300 children, how many did I lose? The answer was none. And then in the 20 years that I worked as an educator, how many children did I lose? None. In the 15 years that Joe's been alive and all the foreign countries I've taken him to, how many times have I lost him? None. And then if Joe and I became separated, what will happen? Well, he's my son, so he's really sensible. So he would either call me or find a security guard. So in that moment, when I could have started to spiral, I've done something else instead, and I've asked myself a series of questions that's broken that loop before it started. When I work with people who've got a fear of flying, and I ask them this question, it's quite a cruel question to ask, really. But I ask them, "What's the worst case scenario?" And they say, "Of course, the plane will crash and I will die." And then I'll say, "How many flights have you been on?" And most of them will say, "Oh, hundreds." And then I'll say, "How many times did you die?" And they'll go, "Oh." So there are things you can do. People say you can't outthink anxiety, but you can ask a series of clever questions to change the way that you're thinking about it, so that instead of spiraling like, oh, what will happen if I lose Joe? I just look at all the evidence. I've never lost a child, and Joe's really sensible. So it's not about outthinking, but you can ask some clever questions that can change the way you perceive it, I think.
I think what you just said is so important because what we would have done in the past is we would have future paced ourselves into all the ways that what are we going to do when we lose Joe? And then
Absolutely.
you're living there. But what you
Yeah.
did instead is you rewound to like what is true? What has been true in the past? And so then you're able to be reasonable. And so that's what I was saying once I figured out the whole histamine thing because I had a lot of these tools and tricks, but I still struggled with that until I figured
Yeah.
out the histamine piece. So
Yeah.
once I figured out the high histamine in my nervous system, and that's how my nervous system feels, is that anxious feeling. Once I figured that out, now I'm able to use my tools and
Yeah.
be reasonable. But what you just said is what I do with my son when he'll and have you ever noticed often with anxious thoughts, it sneaks past the critical faculty because it's about safety. We're allowed to worry if it's about safety. Did I turn off the stove? Let me go check 7 times. Well, it's about safety. So therefore it's okay. Or
Yeah.
like, check that I locked the car, and that kind of thing because it's about safety. So
Yeah.
when we can be like, pull that back to previously, what's the evidence from the past? That's what I can recognize. How likely is that? I do think that that is a really helpful thing instead of going forward into what am I going to do when this terrible thing happens. So that's what I have to do with my son because he's only 8. So I have to
Yeah.
walk him through those questions myself, and it really does help.
Yeah, and 8-year-old children can't rationalize in the way that a grown-up can, so I suppose it's our job to help them to rationalize. And every time you do that, every time you take them through that thinking process, not only are you helping them in that moment, but you are providing them a structure for the future. So you're kind of modeling the right way to go through something like that so that eventually he's able to self-regulate and he doesn't need you to lead him through that, because not only are you helping him in the moment, but you are modeling the right way to do it, for the future, so that he can do that as he gets older.
And if I hadn't been through those anxious feelings myself, I would be really frustrated with him because
Yeah.
somebody caught in an anxious loop is so unreasonable. And from the outside, you're like, this is
Yeah.
ridiculous. But it's so real when it's in your body. And I know that because I struggled with anxiety from the time that I was his age, probably younger. And I always went worst case scenario. If my parents were late picking me up, it was obviously because they had died. And now
Yeah.
I'm going to have to figure out how to raise all of my siblings by myself. Like that was where my brain would go. And I didn't have anyone to teach me the framework, and because I don't know that my parents probably didn't struggle with it the same way. And that same phone call that I talked about with my dad where I was like, if I can't even have 30 minutes to talk to my dad on his birthday, something is very wrong. He said to me in that phone call, I said, I've just been really anxious lately and I need to figure out how to sort this out. And he said, Robyn, your anxiety is why you've been so successful in your life. Why would you want to fix that?
Well, I mean,
Isn't that interesting?
it is different generations have different ways of looking. Like anxiety is talked about all the time now. When when I grew up in the 80s, nobody talked about anxiety or mental health problems in general, really. But it's a lot more prevalent now. But people will come to me and say, like, can you get rid of my anxiety? It's not like anxiety is there for a reason. Like in early days, right, cavemen, when they walked out of the cave, the world was dangerous for them. So they needed the fight or flight response, because if a lion came running at them, they better run away, or else they would die. And so I will say that to people. When you walk out of my flat, if a lion's running down the street, I hope you are anxious and I hope you run it. It's not about trying to remove anxiety, because it's there for a reason. It is a self-protective mechanism. It's just that for some people, it should be off, right? And then when a lion runs down the street, it should be on. Then it should be off again. But what happens is it just gets stuck on, and that's when it becomes unhealthy. And when you've got all of those chemicals in the bloodstream all the time, that's why you get injuries. That's why you get illnesses that you can't fight against, because your sort of nervous system has depleted the part of you that fights those things. So like when I work with people, you will have heard of SUD, subjective units of distress. You scale things between 0 and 10, with 0 being I'm totally fine, 10 being this is the worst it could be. I do it for anxiety. I do it for pain. I do it for smoking and things like that as well. And so my level was stuck at a 10 out of 10 all the time. So when I was in a stressful situation, like going on stage, because I was already at max, when I was going on stage, I just couldn't possibly cope. Or when something was happening in my personal life, I just couldn't cope. So it's about getting those numbers down to zero, which is where we should be in everyday life. But of course, like, would you call it anxiety? I'm not sure, but I am driven, and that's why I've achieved quite a lot in my life. You're obviously driven and have achieved a lot too. You know, anxiety is maybe has something to do with it. You know, I am probably somebody who's predisposed to err on the side of negative thoughts, and so I have to be very mindful of that. And even at the weekend, so my parents were here at the weekend, and my dad said, "Well, I just hope this happens, and I just hope that happens." And I sort of picked him up on that and said, "Shall we stop saying that we just hope things will happen? You know, because that suggests that we leave it up to chance. Let's make these things happen in the way that we want them to." And he was like, "Okay," but I could be predisposed to thinking that way, and that's why I've systematically changed the way that I think over the last couple of years, so that you probably think that I am like a complete glass is half full kind of person, or the most like optimistic person in the world. If you'd met me prior to having hypnotherapy, there wasn't even a glass. It's not like it was half empty. There just wasn't a glass. But now I am eternally optimistic because I, you will have found this along the way that you've had certain moments of beauty where you've realized things that you didn't realize before. And I realized that I had so much more choice in life than I thought I had. I thought I was just destined to always be an anxious person, destined to always be an overthinker, destined to always take everybody else's emotions on and never be able to regulate it. But that's given way too much control away. We have the control to make those changes if you understand how. And when I had that moment of realization, I was like, so I could become a hypnotherapist. I could get over 100,000 followers on a social media platform. I could get paid by the social media platform for making videos. And then I just did it because I realized I could, you know.
Now you inspire so many other people. I felt that energy from you. I have this, like, for me, like, very gut knowing, and I'll see sometimes people on social media and I'll be like, "Yes, they have something for me." And as soon as I saw your stuff, I was like, "Yep, he has something for me." So that really exudes, and that's also a resonance thing because, the more we talk, the more I realize just how similar our paths are in our background. And we were talking before about even how we were in high school at the same time and all of that. So
Yeah.
it is really interesting. And I heard someone explain it like this once, like the difference between being stuck up in fight or flight when you're driven. So there's the feeling of being chased in a race by a tiger,
Mm.
or having the end result of crossing the finish line being something you really want to do and running toward that. So what I've done in my life, instead of running away and, like, still trying to get to the finish line but with the tiger behind me, now I'm running toward the goal. And that's a really different energy. That's not a panicked energy. That's a motivated energy. I'm still very driven, I'm very driven, I'm very determined, and I have that hyper focus. But when my dad said, "Your anxiety is why you've accomplished everything you had," I had to correct him in that. I was like, "I understand what you mean, Dad. You're right, I am driven, but the anxiety is actually really harming me. It is harming my body, the way it feels. It doesn't feel right, and I knew it wasn't right. I knew
Yeah.
that it could be better than this. I knew that the way I was feeling actually wasn't, quote unquote, normal, because not everyone else felt that way." And then after I had my son, I ended up with really bad postpartum anxiety, but I
Yeah.
didn't know that that's what it was because nobody was talking about it at the time. I'd heard about postpartum depression, but I wasn't depressed. I was really happy because I finally had my baby. But oh my word, I didn't know it wasn't normal to not let anyone hold your baby because you assumed they were going to drop them and they would die. Again, I couldn't sleep. That's another big symptom for me when I'm in an anxious
Me
time.
too.
I had sleep. Yeah. I had to watch him. I was convinced that if I didn't watch him, then, if I didn't have my eyes on him at all times, he would die. And I didn't know that that wasn't normal until I started talking about it. And I have been able to help so many other postpartum women because of my experience and because of going through what I went through, and knowing that that wasn't, I can screen for a lot of that in within my
Yeah.
experience, which is really nice. And I'm so grateful to have had that experience because I have been able to help so many people because of it. And that's where we turn that pain into purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself saying like 3 or 4 times a day that I hate the word normal because I don't think there is such a thing as normal. And if there is, I don't want to be it.
Yep.
However, I think it is useful to like normalize some of these things. So, like, because nobody had ever spoken to you about this stuff, you didn't know what was going on. But the more you speak about it, say on social media, the more you post about things like that, the more people are going to go, ah, that's what's going on, and that's who can help me. And so you build a business, but you also get to help all of these people who've been through the same thing that you have. My motivator in the work that I do, I mean, of course, it's to get paid because I've got a mortgage and a son and things, but it's I struggled with what I was going through for a long time on my own. And if I can help people not have to struggle with that on their own, then that's great. You know, you were talking about running away from something or running towards something. And that's probably like a really great metaphor for the way that I work as a hypnotherapist. I had a consultation with a lady today and she was asking me, do you do regression and things like that? And I always tell people, and it sounds really rude, but I always tell people, you know, I don't care about your past because I can't change your past. It's been and gone. You can't either. What we can, what we can change is your future, how you want to think in the future, how you want to feel in the future. So whereas you might go and see a traditional therapist and talk about how bad your past was and how bad you feel, I'm more future focused in that I want to install, you know, all of the skills and abilities and unlock the things that people already have inside of them. I don't think that we give people special powers. I think we help them to unlock what's already inside of them. I worked with a young girl down in England who came to see me for anxiety. I won't mention her name, but she won't mind me talking about this if she ever came across this podcast, which she won't. But she was in a wheelchair. She'd been told 3 years previous that she would never walk again. And, you know, you're a young girl, you're told by a doctor in a medical coat and stethoscope that you'll never walk again. You're going to believe that. You know, the NHS, by the way, the National Health Service in England and the UK, if you go for stop smoking sessions with the NHS, the first thing they tell you is this will be the hardest thing you've ever done. You know, so anyway, this girl had been told that she would never walk again. She came to see me for anxiety because she wasn't leaving the house because she felt self-conscious in a wheelchair. And so I had a feeling that I would be able to help this girl walk again, but I didn't say that because that would be really unfair. So I did some work on anxiety and self-confidence. And after session 3, she said, I've got a physio appointment tomorrow. And I said, text me after your physio appointment. And we just left it at that. And she texted me the next day and said, I stood for the first time in 3 years for, 30 seconds, 7 different times. And I was like, that's amazing. So we did session 4. And she said, I've got a physio appointment again tomorrow. And I said, text me after. And she texted me and said, I walked for the first time in 3 years. And that's not because of me. I'm not some modern day like Jesus. It's that she already had those skills and abilities inside of her. They were just locked, had been locked for a particular reason. And so I keep in touch with my clients. And we were talking in December, and I'd said to her at the end of the year, make 2 lists, make a list of all of the things that you're proud of, all of your achievements for this year, then make another list of all the things you're going to achieve next year. And she said that, so this was 2025 in December. So December just gone. She said, the previous year she'd left the house once in that whole year to go for a medical appointment. And she said in last year, 25, she lost track of the amount of times she'd left the house because it just became normal for her. And again, that's not because I've got magical powers. It's because hypnosis can unlock the magical powers that people have got inside of them. And that's why it's such an unbelievably powerful modality to use with people.
I couldn't agree more. I find it so empowering. I still do some body talk, but the majority of my practice now is hypnosis because it is
Mm.
just so damn effective.
And
And I
quick,
love it.
super
And
quick.
and quick and quick,
Yeah.
exactly. Speaking of quick, I can't believe how the time has flown. I could talk to you all day. And I'm wondering if you told me about this amazing program that you are releasing. Could you share that with our audience?
Yeah. So when you train as a hypnotherapist, you get taught to niche down. So you should pick a tiny, tiny niche. And I did the opposite of that. I just posted about everything on TikTok. Like anxiety related, I suppose. I didn't pick helping tennis players with performance anxiety. I just went with general anxiety because it's what felt right for me. But a theme started to appear amongst the content that I put out. I put sort of 9 to 10 minute hypnosis sessions on there. The ones that seem to perform the best, have the most comments, have the most messages from people, were about relationships, were about breakups, were about being able to emotionally detach from people or situations. So I decided to put together a course. It's a 7-day hypnosis framework to help people to regulate the nervous system and to be able to move past unhealthy attachments without trying to force themselves to move on, because the act of trying to force yourself to move on becomes very stressful and a lot of pressure. So it's essentially a 7-day hypnosis program, and it's called Detach and Attract. So it did start in my mind as like to help people with romantic relationships to be able to detach from a relationship in order to attract a new one. But actually it's kind of grown so that it could represent anything in life. Like if you have been going through a stressful situation at work, then you need to detach from that so you can attract another form of employment, or you're just in a situation with a friend that's really unhealthy. So it's to change and to take away the pressure of trying to let go by regulating the nervous system and allowing you to then become open to new connections, whether that's love or whether it's new work connections or new friendship connections. We've all been there, haven't we? Like in a situation where there's this unbelievable emotional pull, and it's not about the person and it's not about the situation, but it's about the way that it makes you feel. And so this is it's like a 7-day hypnosis program. It's got like 7 30-minute hypnosis sessions, and then another 7 kind of like booster sessions where you can just do it 10 minutes on a morning to link up with the session you've done the night before. It doesn't need to be done in 7 days. Many people will maybe take 3 or 4 days over one session before they move on to the next one. But it comes with sort of videos that explain a little bit about the science behind what I'm doing. I had so many people who were reaching out to me with this particular issue that I just decided to build something to help people. So quite simply, it's called Detach and Attract. To detach from one thing so that you can then attract another thing, but without the pressure of actually trying to detach, because that's the thing that can be the real killer in that situation. Having been in relationships where I've tried to emotionally detach and found it really difficult. It's what I wish I had when I was going through that.
Oh, that sounds so good. And that will be incredibly helpful. So I will link to that in the show notes. And where can people find you?
So my website is, it sounds like I'm being really big headed, but my website is theandyrobson.com, only because andyrobson.com was taken. So it's theandyrobson.com. And then on TikTok and on Instagram, it's exactly the same. If anybody wants to experience some short hypnosis sessions, they should go to TikTok because I've got hundreds of them on there. And people can go and experience the power of those. There's sessions for weight loss, smoking cessation, vaping cessation, drinking, anxiety, sleep, a whole range of things. And my website is the Andy Robson if anybody wants to work with me as well.
And the TikTok sessions are good. Really, really, really good. I enjoy
Thank you.
them so, so much. So, Andy, thank you so much for being here. You are a light, and I really appreciate you taking this time to chat with us. And I hope
You
we
are
can
most
connect.
welcome.
Oh, good. And I hope we can connect again soon.
Or we will. We'll stay in touch.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me today on The Hypnotic Empath. If this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd follow the show, leave a 5-star review, or share with somebody who needs this kind of support. You can find more resources, hypnotherapy audios, and ways to work with me at robynholm.com. And don't forget, your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a gift. Stay rooted in your power, and I'll see you next time.